computer. All right. Welcome everyone to the December meeting of the California Sierra Club Agriculture Committee. We are a fairly new committee, one of, 13, I think, is it, issue committees? Or is it 13 chapters of the Sierra Club and 11 issue committees under the Conservation Committee of the California Sierra Club. And a mighty organization of 400,000 people, most of whom like to be out in nature. And there hasn't been a really huge focus that I'm aware of on ag except for in, darn, I haven't learned all those chapter names. What's the one there around Santa Cruz? Loma Prieta chapter has had a nice group committee for healthy soils, and this committee kind of came out of that interest, and so I just think it's really timely, and I did not seek to be the chair of this committee, but I'm kind of finding that it's a kind of a powerful position, and so I'm going to try to make the most of it to really put ag on the map in the California Sierra Club and network more with all the like-minded people across the country, like Klaus, who is very active, and Rue, I think somewhat. Well, anyway, you'll learn, we'll have introductions, but they are, Klaus is very active with the grassroots network team, national networking team of Food and Agriculture Forum, and on the core team, right? And on the Farm Bill sub team, and what else? Anyway, you can tell us more. So, wow, Claire, I hate to ask you to take notes again. If I have put what we do is have a Google Doc that is the running agenda, and then the agenda gets turned into meeting notes. And I scribble notes, but I love having help with that. Eric, you've done that help before too. And Ron, so anybody who wants to help record the things that pop for you in this meeting, there's the Google Doc. And you can, the people who are new to the committee or are guests for this meeting, you can see our webpage that has some our mission, our current priorities that we decided on in a survey a couple of months ago, and some really impressive resource pages. So I like when we're this size group and we don't all know everybody, to just have our ground rules, especially since we really want to cover a lot in this meeting with Jo Ann, to remember that we're having a discussion and not a debate. So if there's things you hear that you disagree with, it's like, there's a way of expressing your opinion that's just adding to the conversation. And then speak so people know who you are, and where you're coming from, although might not be necessary if we have introductions. Listen and try to understand, and seek first to understand, and not to try to be understood. And if you want, just read what step up, step back means. I really like that as a ground rule. So I invited a few people to kind of help me think in advance what we want to, different aspects that we want to get out of our meeting with Jo Ann Baumgartner. You're founding director, right, of the WildFarm Alliance?
Well, I was one of many people who founded WildFarm Alliance.
Well, we start with you, introduce yourself, and a little bit about just a thumbnail and then you can get more into WFA in a bit.
Thank you. Yeah, well, it's lovely to be with you tonight. Let's see, I have been working in agriculture since my 20s. I worked on a research project using treated wastewater in conventional ag, got sprayed, had to, get in the truck and get out of there multiple times. I know how disgusting conventional agriculture still is to this day, where they would come by and say, oh, it's time to spray. Well, they still do that. It's so crazy. But in any case, I after that, my husband and I got, sorry, this is long introduction. We farmed organically. I have worked for Eco Farm Conference and Sustainable Cotton Project, and I've been working with WildFarm Alliance for the last 20 years.
Great. I'm gonna invite Claire to introduce yourself next, and other members of the committee.
Thank you, Jan and Jo Ann. I'm Claire Broom. My background is not in agriculture. In fact, it's in public health, but I'm here because I've gotten recruited to and very active in the Sierra Club Energy Climate Committee. And as I got more informed, I learned what an important issue our farming environment is for the climate. Farmers need the climate, but also the amount of greenhouse gas emissions are huge. But the potential for sequestration and multi-benefits is huge. So I'm taking a lot of time because I wanted to reinforce what Jan was saying. Like, you could say, well, the Sierra Club, those are people who care about mountains. But in fact, I've been so impressed by how much the Sierra Club can gain from expert volunteers, but then how much they can do because of their staff and their national reach and the kind of interaction between volunteers and staff. And I think we'll also hear about the fact that for other Sierra Club state chapters, agriculture is even more central than it has been for California. So I really applaud Jan for really thinking strategically about how Sierra Club can be much more involved as a good partner and ally with other agriculture champions. So I'm sorry for that long introduction, but I'll chair back to you, Jan.
That's why I called on you first. Make sure you have plenty of time. I'm sorry. Eric, come on in.
Yeah, so I'm Eric Brooks. I've been a member of Sierra Club I'm probably one of the lesser members here actually, but I've been a member for 27 years. I started as a grassroots environmental and social justice organizer and consumer organizer and with Ralph Nader's public interest research groups back in the mid 80s. And what got me started in this, a lot of different things got me started in this. One of the main ones was that I worked for Forest Forever for a while and started learning about the dynamics of watershed ecosystems and their carbon storage capacity and how forests work. And then I also, through that, got turned on to Paul Stamets and his work around mushrooms and how mycelial networks are absolutely crucial to the evolution of all life on Earth and how our agricultural soils work and how all soils work. And then 27 years ago, almost 28 years ago now, I also became a vegan. And as a vegan and an environmental activist, I became really hyper focused on how does agriculture really work? And that was right around the time people were getting excited about regenerative agriculture. and so as a vegan, I wanted to scrutinize a lot of the claims about some of it. And that caused me to really go down the rabbit hole and learn a lot about it. And that is how I ended up on this committee, because we kept debating it on the energy climate list. And I knew that this committee was going to be important to establishing good policy. And now that I kind of know what I'm talking about, I decided to be part of the committee. So that's my long intro.
Yeah. Ron, you're the only other committee member here so far tonight.
Hi, I'm a humble bug farmer, grow beneficial insects and help farmers get off of toxic pesticides. So our company's been doing this since 1950, which was the year I was born. I wasn't very active back then. I'm a pest control advisor, and I encourage farmers to basically work with nature. I think it's a much better idea than trying to beat her into submission. So I have the pleasure of being on the governor's Sustainable Pest Management Work Group, and get to tell them that, oh, we don't need no stinking pesticides, that we can work with the biology and get the job done as far as growing up food, fiber, medicine. So appreciate everybody being here.
Yay. I'm going to call on the other Sierra Club members next. Tom.
Well, thanks, Jan. This is my first meeting of this group. I'm an old anthropologist. Got my start in agricultural issues at UC Santa Cruz. I remember when Jo Ann and Sam were growing garlic down there. And worked on the organic farm, a lot of that early eco farm stuff. But I was an energy efficiency consultant for about 25 years, working for the state, for the research institutions around the country, and electric and gas utilities. And I've only been a Sierra Club member for about 5 or 6 years. I was more in the NRDC camp and prior to that, but I really had a falling out when I realized just how much earnest good work was being taken advantage of by corporate forces. And so Sierra Club's been a home for me for the last 5 or 6 years. I'm active on the Climate and Energy Committee at the state level, as well as a lot of stuff in my local. I'm on the executive committee for Sonoma Group in the Redwood chapter. And got to take a nice walk with Wendy the other day. And she's really the one that reminded me that Jo Ann was doing this work and that this committee was here. So I kind of connected you guys together. I'm glad I did.
Jan, you're on mute.
Klaus, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So I joined the Sierra Club, I think about 4 years back. I joined Citizen Climate Lobby 6 years ago and became sector leader agriculture for business climate leaders. And then worked as a liaison to the Sierra Club. Actually, the idea was, why don't we connect, with other NGOs and develop a common language. And so that really resulted with me being asked to join the core team, which was cool. And so I'm on the federal committee, federal law, and I'm leading a sub-team for the 4 per 1,000 organization. I'm the liaison for both the Sierra Club and Citizen Climate Lobby with 4 per 1,000. So that has been very enriching. We were very active at the UN Food System Summit this year, working with things you never heard of, like the European Union actually embraced the farm to fork idea that came out of this, to link the supply chain from farmer to fork, because it's being generally recognized now that the problem is not with the farmer, It's with the supply chain that refuses to collaborate and cooperate with the farmer, changing their sourcing strategies and so on, and the way they develop products. So there is sort of a laser focus coming in on the middle between farm to fork, right? The issue is in the middle. And so we started a farm bill, not really a sub-team, an initiative. It's below the federal policy team. But we really, really want to bring attention to the farm bill and what a mess it is, right? Because we are spending too much time thinking about new programs, when in all reality, there are dozens of conservation programs on the shelf, perfectly developed, ready to go. Some of them already in stages of implementation. There's no money in it. They simply didn't fund it. And under the Trump administration, they defunded a lot of that stuff, moved money around. So there's really a need to not just pay attention to the bill and the bills themselves, but also how the funding is being allocated for them. I'm working on a project in the Palouse in Washington State, with a group of farmers. And I was looking at, soil health legislation got introduced in Washington. So I'm looking it up, and the budget is $750,000 with one full-time person, right? I mean, it's absurd. So they're not funding initiatives that require resources to really come to work. So we're working in this federal policy space, but this year the farm bill is going to take center stage. The misallocation of funds into the insurance program is just insane. What that does to the entire industry. So I mean, for example, one way of fighting CAFOs is to cut off the subsidies to the corn market, right? Because if the corn growers and the soy growers don't get subsidized, then CAFOs get to be really expensive. Because they buy food below market price. So when you start thinking about engaging on the political level, then we just have to be really smart in understanding how the economy works and where the levers are. So that's what we are going to do this year with the farm bill, and you're going to hear from us. And I hope you're going to join us. All right.
Great. I'm really glad you came. Thanks, Klaus. And Nick.
All right. Good evening. I am an ecological designer by background. I developed one of the first permaculture and regenerative design associates degrees in the horticulture department at Merit. So I'm a designer and specializing in habitat restoration, water systems, and have developed a couple of cooperatives around this and a couple of nonprofits, namely the California Center for Natural History, that's working on biodiversity metrics for regenerative development vis-a-vis community science. And I am also founder of the California Large Scale Ecosystem Restoration Camps Council. So all that to say, I'm very interested in reversing extinction trends with blue collar jobs.
Wow, that's great. Yeah. I'm so wishing that a member of our committee, Justine Berg, could come, because that's her favorite topic too, is jobs creation for sustainable future. So who am I missing? Wendy.
Yes, and I think Rue also. So
Rue.
yeah. Hi, everybody. Great to see some old friends and some new faces. I think I've known Jo Ann for maybe 35 years, and Jan and Ron through EcoFarm Conference, which I'm now working on my 41st, the 42nd EcoFarm Conference. And Jo Ann probably has been to as many as I have, or maybe you've been to all 42, I'm not sure. So yeah, we have connections way back, and I am a Sierra Club member, and my family, my parents were involved with Sierra Club way back in ancient history. And I'm very engaged with a lot of what now we're calling regenerative ag issues, and have been for my entire adult life. And I have always believed in networking and collaboration. So I'm really pleased. I have seen that shift with a number of the large environmental organizations in not that have always kind of considered ag to be the enemy for so many years, and to start understanding that, first of all, you can't put all of the ag eggs, I guess, in one basket. And second of all, as I think Eric was saying earlier, the incredible potential for agriculture to be not just part of the solution, but kind of a critical part of our way forward. We all need to eat. So, and farmers are land managers. And those of us on the land every day, sometimes know way more than, to use kind of pejorative, term like armchair environmentalists who aren't actually out on the land. So I think we all have a lot to learn from each other. And pardon me, I'm going to turn off the video, but I will be listening and paying attention. So thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. And I'd like to hear from you, Rue.
I'm really interested in the program, so I'm going to make this really brief. Despite the goats behind me, I'm not a farmer, but I am an enthusiastic eater and a supporter of sustainable agriculture for all the reasons that have been listed throughout this conversation. Ag is a major part of the solution going forward, and local agriculture fulfills a role that nobody else can. So I'm on a ridiculous number of committees, and some of you will know some of them. So I think I'd like to link solutions together and try and seed other parts of what Sierra Club and others are doing, so that we can remain connected.
Where do you live, Rue? What are you in Sonoma County as well?
I am. I'm in unincorporated Sonoma County, a small rock distance from Wendy.
Okay, and that's where Tom is from.
Tom is from the other side of Sonoma County. He's on the eastern boundary, where Wendy and I are west.
Okay.
Sonoma County is well represented here this evening.
Yeah, yeah. Nick, where are you hanging out lately?
I'm in Bolinas,
Okay.
West Marin.
Uh-huh. And
Close enough. You'll count. We'll include you. You can come visit.
yeah.
Thank
you. And you have interest in around outside of Portland too, where you do projects, right? And I think Klaus aren't you in Oregon?
I'm in Bend, Oregon.
Oregon, all right.
Yeah, snowed in.
I kind of is, and Eric's somewhere in the Bay Area, right? And Claire's in.
Yeah, I'm San Francisco, but I'm from Bishop out in the desert mountains.
Oh, I remember you saying that. I forgot. And Claire's in Berkeley. So there, and Jo Ann is in Santa Cruz. All right. So there we kind of get like a little geographic feel for where we're all sitting right now. So I'm happy to now invite Jo Ann to, when Wendy suggested to Tom that Sierra Club could, look at supporting or networking with WildFarm Alliance, and sent a copy of the WildFarm Alliance 2050 vision statement. I was already really wowed by other documents that WildFarm Alliance had done over the last couple of years, but I hadn't looked at the new vision statement. So that's where I'm looking forward to our getting that vision now from Jo Ann.
Yeah, okay, well, thank you again for inviting me, and it's lovely to hear about all your backgrounds and to see Wendy and Tom. And of course, Jan and Ron. And so I'm going to share my screen. Let's see, host disabled participant screen sharing.
There you go.
Okay, let's see. Start things. Shoot, it looks like, I bet you can see, can you see this stuff on the side? The next slide and all that, or do you just see the main?
No, we can't.
I think it's good.
Okay, okay. Yeah, well, so I was going to talk about what we're doing, WildFarm Alliance and our vision. And but you know, as I was getting ready for this talk, I was looking at what you all had put together and reflecting on what our vision is and what we're about. And so this is from your website, and we're mainly focusing on mitigating climate change and the biodiversity crisis. We also work on a lot of the other stuff that you all have listed, but it's not our, hyper focus. But of course, you'll see a lot of what we do does impact everything from soil health and food production to, or productivity to water conservation and food quality and animal welfare. So, and then as I was talking with Jan yesterday, and I was thinking about, well, what, if we're trying to figure out how we can work with you and maybe how you could work with us, I realize this is a really big wish list, but why not? We're running out of time. So you'll hear more about what I mean with biodiversity-based farming systems. But when I was looking at your 2021 priorities, you didn't have anything about this topic. And so maybe you'd consider adding that to your priorities. And then also add some of this information to your web page. I was telling Jan I'd be happy to share some of our resources, not just what we've published, but also research papers, seminal research papers. And then it would be cool to create a slide deck about biodiversity-based farming systems for other chapters of the Sierra Club. And ultimately, I think it would be really cool to figure out, and I don't even know how you do this, figure out, or if you could do this, of those 400,000 members of California's Sierra Club, there's got to be some farmers. I mean, Sam and I are members, and we were members back when we were farming. I mean, so who are they? And they should be working closely with us and all, or at least the priorities that they resonate with. But I would love to know who they are, because they would very likely resonate with our work. So that's a bigger wish list. And when I was looking at your website last night, I thought, oh, isn't that interesting? This piece over here on the right was the Facebook feed, and it says we want less of this and more of this, which then supports all these birds, right? Isn't that cool? And Doug Tallamy's written about that, and he's such a marvelous thinker. Well, but that isn't reflected in your priorities. It is in your mission, and so that hence my wish list. So what are we talking about? Well, I've been on a lot of hikes, Sierra Club hikes and other kinds of hikes where bird club hikes where somebody looks out into the agricultural field that is next to where you're hiking, and they go, oh, isn't that beautiful? And I look at it and I think, no, it's actually industrial agriculture and it stinks. And so, but over time, I realized there's 4 principles that I think need to simply get everyone on board with, everyone who cares about the environment, everybody in the Sierra Club, everybody in, in sustainable agriculture. So keep the soil covered. That's the first principle. And it's easy to, you look at a farm, is the soil covered or not? Now, of course, some farmers are going from one crop to the other. And while there is a lot of effort to try and figure out reduced tillage or no till, it's hard, especially in organic. And so we recognize that there's, sometimes the soil is uncovered, but keep it covered most of the time, especially in perennial crops. Secondly, there should be flowers present all the time. Here in California, I mean, maybe not where it's freezing in the mountains, but because it's supporting those beneficial insects and the beneficial birds, the birds that maybe aren't necessarily helping the farm, but they are part of the ecosystem and they are helping it. And so, and of course, bees. So flowers are so important. Third, we need structure. So not just annual flowers, which are great, but we need structure. We need shrubs and trees, which is going to support all kinds of food for birds and other kinds of wildlife in our world. And four, is there evidence of wildlife on the farm? So like when I was walking by that industrial farm, I knew you weren't going to find any bees or beneficial insects, or maybe you would see some wildlife prints in the mud, but likely, they fenced them out if they could. So anyways, that's just kind of a setting for what we're talking about. Our vision is bringing nature back to the farm. And I think you guys all know, how terrible things are, and agriculture, there's a lot of possibility for turning things around for biodiversity, for climate change. And so we have this 3-part campaign. One is farmland flyways. The other 2 are wildways and waterways. So with this one, we envision 1 million nest boxes and perches. So man-made structures are on 10% of US farms and become part of our farmland flyway trail. So that on average would be 5 nest boxes or perches, and that would be 1 million structures. And I'm going to talk more about birds in a little bit. Our second campaign is hedgerows to the moon and back. And the reason, and this is leading to 500,000 miles of living field borders. And the reason why that number is because historically in the UK, they had 500,000 miles before industrial ag came and ripped out about half of them. And the UK is a small country. So if they can do it, we certainly can. But, planting 500,000 miles of hedgerows is a lot of work. So, and then our third campaign is the riparian habitat, restoring the lifeblood of the landscape, because so much of our riparian areas have been degraded or destroyed, and they really, besides protecting water quality, they support so many species that are dependent on them for part of their life cycle, especially in the West, especially in California. And then all of these the riparian woods, the wood in the hedgerows, the structure that I talked about, that is carbon, and per area, you can store much more carbon in the same amount of area than you ever could in the soil by itself by putting compost on or a cover crop. So having these edges and or intersections in fields, making the fields smaller and surrounded by woody vegetation is really going to help store a lot more carbon. So we just published this impact report, and this is one of the pieces, which we're not going to read all this, but I'll just tell you about them. We create these, one of the things that we're doing is creating these short videos where we interview a farmer like Ron Rosenbrand over here and a researcher, Dr. Julie Jedlicka here. And Ron manages a vineyard up in Napa, and Julie studied bluebirds in vineyards for 10 years. And Ron has 800 bluebird boxes. And he says that the blue-green sharpshooter, which carries Pierce's disease and kills their really valuable vines, I mean, there's virtually none of that disease on his in his vineyard, and Julie has documented that bluebirds eat leafhoppers, which blue-green sharpshooters are kind of leafhoppers. So so that's a really fun story. You can hear about that or watch that video. Another thing, or this story here, we worked with Dennis and Kay out in the Central Valley, where they are revitalizing this town of Allensworth, which was the first town in California established by African Americans. And they have a farm, and we help them plant a significant area of hedgerows, and you can tell they just still, well, I mean, I think you can with a smile. They're delightful people to work with, and are really care about turning things around. And then our farmland waterways, Emily Reinhardt works at Davis Ranches, where they have done installed several miles of hedgerows and riparian habitat along a slough that connects the Sacramento River habitat to a Calusa refuge. And so that's pretty exciting to, I mean, we work with farmers like this all the time, and love to work with them, and are looking for more farmers to work with. Hence my suggestion about, let's figure out who are the farmer members of Sierra Club. Jan had, I think in the email, had put a link to this document we published this year. It's just a continuation of our work. We've been helping the organic community since the early 2000s address biodiversity conservation. It's in the rule. Nobody was paying attention. I think most farmers know they're supposed to be conserving biodiversity if they're organic. This document is kind of wonky. It is about, but it's kind of cool too. It's about helping organic inspectors fill out their inspection form, where when they walk the land, what do they see? What are the positive indicators they see? And what are the red flags they see? We're just continuing to move the needle to more biodiversity on the farm. Another publication, we created how to conserve biodiversity actions to take on a continuum from simple to complex. And so so here is soil life, and then as you move, if that's all you're taking care of, I mean, soil is really complicated, but there's more than the life underground. So keeping that soil covered, adding different kinds of feature water nest boxes, shelters, adding flowers, like I mentioned, making them native, having structure, and linking this together in corridors. So you're starting to hear some of the same things. But what I wanted to show you was this really cool chart, which then shows you how all of those different steps are helping all of these different kind of organisms on our farms. And so, while not every single species in our world can exist on farms, a lot can, and we can do so much better a job at helping them survive this climate change and the biodiversity declines. Like there's something like 70% of wildlife populations in the world are gone, have been lost in the last 50 years. So yeah, we got to do something. So this is something we've been working on for 3 years, I think 4 years. I actually got my master's looking at birds eating codling moth in apple orchards. So avian pest control has been something I've loved for a long time. And we published this document, which is about 60 pages, and it identifies all these avian pest control studies and shows how important birds are for pest control, which will then reduce pesticide use. And I go to the appendix because in the appendix, we have listed these different studies in temperate agriculture across the world related to avian pest control. And there's 120 studies in fruit and nuts and field crops and vegetables and the raptors that work in all of them. And of those 120 studies, 90% of them showed that the birds were helpful. So we're I think the landscape of how farmers relate to birds with our work. It used to be farmers would say to me, oh yeah, birds, God, let me tell you my horror story. But now I rarely hear that anymore. Because farmers are starting to understand that birds can be helpful. There's a few birds that are problematic. I show you this because this is our story map where we have, we've taken that booklet and kind of made it really simple to scroll through. And there's all these different things that you can learn from the videos that lived here. We have a map of farmers that are putting up boxes, and we're going to expand it to putting a map of mapping farmers that put in hedgerows and riparian areas. And so here are just a map of the farmers who we've interviewed for video. This is Drew Rivers up at Full Belly, was one of the farmers too. And Olivia Smith was the researcher who we interviewed. We also do field days with folks, and this was one at River Hill Farm. But back to this platform, our benefits of birds on the farm platform. We have this lovely little, let me see if this is going to work. That was fast. Try it again. So I show you that because it's such a wonderful thing to watch a bird feed its young and to teach farmers that, like, they eat a lot of insects. Doug Talmy thinks that, or his students have figured that between 6,000 and 9,000 insects are eaten by chickadees, a family of chickadees during a nesting period. So there's so many reasons why we need to bring nature back to the farm. It's delightful, and it helps the farmers, and it helps with climate change, and it helps with biodiversity crisis. So here was my wish list again, and that's it. So you can contact me, Jo Ann B at wildfarmalliance.org. Or if you forget that, you can just put info@wildfarmalliance.org and I'll get it. And I am going to stop sharing. And
wow, Joanne, that was really great. I just think every Sierra Club member in the country would get something out of what you just shared. I know people will probably have questions they want to ask you right away. I'm gonna suggest that whatever comes to your mind, put it in the chat, and we'll get to general discussion. But I invited a few people to ask a few questions from different perspectives to make sure that we get those into the discussion. And just to help remind me, I'm gonna put some of that plan in. I hope this works for me, just for me to see. So I did invite Phil McGrath. He's a member from Camarillo, farming organically on 300 acres. When I told him about this meeting, he immediately emailed me saying, I was just turning under my pumpkins, and I saw what some kind of falcon, some kind of hawk, red-tailed hawk, and then there was a rabbit ran by, and then whoa, there was a coyote, and the whole it was just triggered immediate excitement for him, and I know he's gonna want to watch the recording. He had something come up, so I guess what I would be asking from the organic farmer's point of view, and maybe Ron could ask it better on behalf of organic farmers, but is the Food Safety Act, and the worries that farmers have about animal poop, basically.
Yeah, well, we have worked on that topic for years and years, so I know a lot about it, more than I. Yeah, well, anyways, back I want to say 5 years ago, when FDA's food safety regulation came out, we had worked super hard to make sure that it was okay and wasn't going to force out farmers who wanted to support the wild, and we were successful in that. So that regulation actually says in its preamble, which is like the thinking of the agency before they actually get to the actual regulation. In there, they say, we support sustainable conservation. We recognize that it can help with food safety. And so that was good. They also say you don't have to fence out wildlife. You don't have to destroy wildlife habitat. So that's regulatory, but then there's obviously the buyers and shippers that they want to do way more. And so there's a bunch of research that has happened around studying wildlife and when are they an issue. And it comes back to, if the wildlife are exposed to cattle, they're more likely to carry pathogens. And because, or especially E. coli pathogens. It depends. It depends on what kind of wildlife we're talking about. But like I was just talking with a researcher at UC Davis who's getting ready to publish a study where he looked at birds in lettuce fields, because the lettuce is the industry is hyper vigilant around food safety, which they actually should be, because they have a crappy product. The salad mix is dangerous. I mean, when you have so many cut surfaces and they just mow it like a lawnmower, you see the harvesting machine is slimy. Anyways, that's another story. But the research, Danny Karp was just telling me, he's getting ready to publish this, that the birds in and around these lettuce fields that have some habitat or diversity in the Salinas Valley, there's a lot more birds there, and there are a lot of birds that are in more diversity of birds. So there's birds in decline, and there's no pathogens, but birds that are coming from grazed areas where there's cattle, there's a tiny percent of them are carrying pathogens. But I want to have a caveat on that, because you might remember I showed you a picture of Drew Rivers from Full Belly Farm, and we had interviewed her along with Olivia Smith, Dr. Smith, who also studied food safety and with birds. And she went from Washington State through Oregon and down through California, interviewing and testing farms and the birds. She captured the birds and studied them to see if they had pathogens. And farms like Full Belly that have livestock the birds didn't have high levels of pathogens. So it really depends on how you treat your livestock, how well you take care of them, and how well the landscape, how healthy the surrounding landscape is. And Full Belly Farm is an example of a great, they would fit well in the UK. They have hedgerows around like every 10-acre field or a riparian habitat. And it's just really diverse. And that helps, you know, diversity is a dilution. But more than that, it's you're not supporting bad things. It's not just dilution. So yeah, I could go on, but that's probably enough.
That's helpful for me. I thank you for your work and making sure that wildlife feel at home on farms. My next kind of vision on the meeting was to invite Nikki. I see you've joined us. I'm so happy. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but being a Healthy Soils Program educator, do you have any question that for Jo Ann? Anything that comes off the top of your head?
Well, I thank you, Jo Ann. That was really an amazing presentation, and thank.
Uh-oh.
You muted yourself.
We mute.
Okay, I'm back.
Hey,
I'm back.
Good.
And so forgive me, I did miss the first part.
And we did some introductions, and I can share the video with you later. But give us a thumbnail on your background and what you're doing now.
Oh, great. Yeah. Well, I started farming in Petaluma about 12 years ago and accidentally got hooked on farming, and proceeded to do that for 10 years. Excuse me. And then the last year I've been working for the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources Cooperative Extension. It's such a mouthful, helping with the Healthy Soils program and the sweep. So the CDFA has been putting lots of monies, millions of dollars into the farmers' hands so that they can have extra funds to perform practices that they want to do but don't always make sense with the final budget. So yeah, so it's been very busy, very crazy, as this year all of the grants are a first come first serve basis, so we've been rushing to get in as many proposals, and there of course is a lot to do going forward, and because not every practice is necessarily given the same weight. But I am curious, like, are the farmers you're working with, have they been using any of the Healthy Soils programs, any of the grants or the sweep grants?
Yeah, well, actually, we are getting grants from the Healthy Soils program to assist growers like you in signing them up right now to access those funds. And then we go out and help them. This is our third year, I think, of working in that program, which is awesome because finally there's a lot of money out there to help farmers put in this kind of habitat that we want to see. We also do help growers when they want to, growers that have never put in a cover crop, we help them or help them put compost. But what we've done last year and what we'll likely do this year, although I'm not sure, last year in the round, the money got spent quickly and we didn't have that many farmers to help. So what we did was we called up all of the UC people, all of the RCDs, everybody who's working on healthy soils throughout the state, and said, we want to work with your growers if they need a hedgerow or a riparian habitat. And so that was really fun to expand out into others and work together on a bigger California landscape. So that's mainly our specialty, is hedgerows and riparian habitat, but we'll work on other healthy soils issues too. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You're muted.
I keep muting myself. Eric, what's your burning question for Jo Ann?
Yeah, I have a question, but first I do want to say with regard to including biodiversity, cultivating biodiversity, I think that that's obvious and you're right to point that out. I think it's not that we don't understand biodiversity, it's that to us it's a given and we didn't even consider that it needs to be stated as one of the primary objectives. So I think you're right, and I hope that in our next meeting committee that we actually work on changing that. I can say, as somebody who understands the life cycle of salmon really well, how crucial biodiversity and the interaction between animals and the soil is. And salmon is a great example of that. So, and if you work on riparian areas, you understand that too. So my question is, one thing I've struggled with, especially since I started really coming out and frankly criticizing a lot of the quote unquote regenerative grazing stuff that's out there, is that not just with regard to animals, but with regard to all these techniques. My main thing is reversing the climate crisis. That's kind of my main job, and as a full-time environmentalist. And what we lack from all of our sustainable and restorative agriculture programs and ideas and theories and practice is we lack a lot of peer-reviewed study on how much carbon is actually, and that's why I say peer-reviewed, is actually being stored on farms. How long does that extra storage take place, and when does it level off? And how many acres, this is the crucial thing, acres or hectares on any given piece of land is storing how much carbon, and then how do you extrapolate that to the global climate crisis? We're so young on all this stuff that we don't have enough of that data, and we don't have enough peer-reviewed studies that we can then combine them globally into a meta study. And just to give an example of why I bring that up, I'm a big fan of food forests. Ever since I learned about multi-tiered food forests, I thought, wow, this is great. This is, especially as a vegan, I think that's like really wonderful. Let's grow food forests all over the planet. But even though I'm really excited about food forests, I have no idea whether a food forest stores more carbon per acre or a really well-run biodynamic, with no-till row crop field with multiple food species and multiple animal species for, like birds and bats and whatever, and salmon and you name it. We just don't have those numbers yet. And I was wondering if you have any ideas on that or have seen anything happening towards that, carbon stored per acre and over time.
Wow. Yeah. And I agree with you. We need a lot more of that research. What I was thinking about, as I said, so much more carbon is stored in riparian and hedgerows, was this study, Louise Jackson, a peer-reviewed study, Louise Jackson from UC, who's now retired, published a couple years ago, where 18% of the carbon was stored in 6% of the acreage on this organic farm up near Sacramento. And so as an example, right? But yeah, it would be fabulous to have the kind of metrics that you're talking about. I look forward to that, right? But I'm not sure who's doing it.
And can you drop the link to that in the chat, by the way?
Sure. And I think if you didn't pick up on this, I would love to help you with your website, and we could put that up on your website.
That would be great.
Yeah.
That would be great. Klaus, if this is like following on to Eric's question? You're on mute. Can you unmute?
Yeah, that was a rookie move. You know, this is really a core focus of carbon market discussions right now, because there is this idea of rewarding farmers on a ton per acreage basis. But then when you start understanding how this really works, you know, there are some soils that naturally hold more carbon than other types of soils. So for the same amount of effort, right, one farmer gets a different result than the other farmer if you just want to reward them on a ton per acre basis. Different types of soils, different conditions of soil, different climates, access to water. I mean, these are all influence factors of how much carbon can be stored in the soil. So what the industry is moving towards, and this is when I say the industry, what we should be moving towards from a very general perspective, is to look at the quality of the soil microbiome, because carbon is a feedstock. Now, carbon is food for microbiomes, for the microbiota in the soil. So when there are some efforts out there like Indigo Arc and so on, and they continue to encourage monocropping practices. So they're reducing the damage by bringing in a seed that has its own nitrogen and things like this. But anytime you have a monoculture, you end up using pesticides, because these monocrops are getting attacked by pesticides, right, by weeds and insects. So they have to defend them, and they're using chemicals to do that. These chemicals destroy the soil microbiome. Yeah. So when you focus on the soil microbiome, that is the core issue that then it generates biodiversity, you know, enriches basically the circle of life. So it's just a shift in thinking, you know, and there is a lot of energy right now trying to define ecosystem services provided through regenerative agriculture in ways that you have metrics that are fair, equitable, right? No matter what your size is, but can also more reflective of what we really want as an outcome.
Well, thanks.
Does it make sense to you?
Thank you. I'm gonna call on Claire. She's had something on her mind on this subject.
And yeah, thank you for this is a great discussion, and I'd like to build on the previous questions and comments. As Jan knows, I'm always wanting to know, you know, what the metric is, and, you know, how do we build those metrics in, whether it's CARB scoping plan, whether it's healthy soils, I mean, whether it's your carbon markets, you know, it's central. However, the more I learn about agriculture, the more I recognize how complex and also it's really an evolving field in terms of both the types of measurements and the appropriate reference labs, the appropriate measurements, and people, you know, maybe it's the microbiome, Klaus. I'm a big fan of microbiomes, but it's also, you know, to a certain extent, I think it's going to be critical, but I would say it's something of a hypothesis. So at this point, my sense is what we should be aiming for is, say, two things. One would be when you do grant specifications for healthy soils or for this multi-purpose awards that the Department of Water Resources is going to be making, we write those specifications with our best guesstimates about which should be heavily weighted practices. You know, so what do we want to see them doing, and how do we want to weight those? And we should require measurement. But I think the other thing that we found in public health is you really benefit when you're in this sort of unknown area by having the measurement independently funded. It doesn't come out of the farmer's grant. So basically, when you have an award stream, there would be a parallel award that covers the measurements. And ideally, particularly for some of these really tricky ones, I actually listened to some of the healthy soils, learning about soil. And it sort of convinced me that supporting reference laboratories can be critical so that the measurements are made in the same laboratory. So you have a better basis for comparison. And that may or may not be feasible. But I just put it out there, the value of independent funding for measurement, reference laboratories, really, and I'm sure probably the carbon market and all of the, tech people are way ahead on this, but they tend to devolve to modeling. And I think modeling's great, but I really want it benefits by independent validation and verification with on the ground information. And I know this is simplifying, the more I learn, the more it's, seen one field. But I think, so you can't be too prescriptive. And I like what Klaus is saying about, evolving your systems of measurement. But I think at the end of the day, you do want to support levels of both research and good evaluation science. So, it's just a really interesting, in my uneducated view, it's an interesting time for figuring out how do we maximize, and I know you guys want to maximize yield. I want to maximize carbon sequestration, but I think we can do both, or maximizing appropriate yield. So anyway, so that's sort of more a comment than a question, but I'd love to hear Jo Ann's thoughts about those ideas.
Yeah. Well, that was really thoughtful of you to share those, or everybody's ideas are really interesting, but it seems like, from my perspective, yes, the soil is super important. The soil and soil microbiology is super important. It's going to help define the carbon. But then, what about Klaus was saying, what about those farms that are in maybe in desert conditions and they don't have a lot of moisture? There's not going to be a lot of carbon storage there because there's not a lot of microbes there because there's not a lot of moisture there, and it's too hot a lot of the time. And so how do you make that fair? But from my perspective, it's more than just soil, as I said, and because if you think about climate change, we are all cooking, right? It's not just people, it's the birds are cooking too, and the other wildlife. And so there's gotta be, we gotta measure that above the ground carbon, that carbon that is supporting the wildlife on our planet. And there has, obviously, like I mentioned, there has been some studies, there's been journal articles more often on windbreaks and carbon. It's not as complicated or controversial as what's going on in the soil, but from what I've heard is the Healthy Soils Program, the Healthy Soils Program has a tool that you use where you can figure out, if you plant a mile of hedgerow, you get this much carbon. And I've heard that their estimates are really, really low. But in any case, I also agree with you, Claire, that we need somebody who's not in bed with the people who are getting the money. They have to be separate from the measurement people, because I have seen so often with organic, remember the organic document about positive indicators and red flags? Well, part of the problem with organic is the farmers pay the certifier to inspect them. And so the certifier doesn't want to lose the farmer's business. And so they're gonna, you know, that really needs to be decoupled. And I don't think that's gonna happen too soon. But anyways, yeah, we'll start going forward with this issue, and with carbon, that's a really excellent point. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for both for that discussion. And I want to see what has on Rue's mind now.
Thanks. I'm absolutely fascinated with the conversation. One thing that sort of triggered one of my usual bents is the discussion of data. As a person who tries diligently to insert policies that will support appropriate actions in government and jurisdictional documents, data helps drive the advocacy. Without data, it's really, really hard to say, but this would be a good thing. That's not going to get us anywhere. So independent studies, in the last general plan update in Sonoma County, just as an example, I worked really, really hard to get stream setbacks. And I did manage to get every blue line stream in Sonoma County to have some setback, but it was nearly impossible to come up with a number or an equation or something that was agreed upon everywhere for what that setback should be. This is just an example. And they wound up doing it upside down. I was grateful to do it at all at that point, where the stream setbacks in the upland areas are narrower than in the, you know, the flatlands where there are larger rivers. It should be the other way around if it were any way at all, in my mind. But there was absolutely, I mean, I did a search throughout the United States and Western Europe, just looking for any data I could use to specify what that setback should be that was from a credible source. And I wound up with one very small study out of Ohio, which I handed over to the attorneys in order to craft the language in order to get anything done at all, because the pushback on setbacks from agriculture, not small farms, but big agriculture, wine industry interests, was phenomenal. So to get anything done at all requires data, requires credible documentation that is agreed upon and is independent. So I just can't emphasize that enough, because if we're going to get support in our from our jurisdictions, we need to supply them with the language that will help them make the right decision and put it into policy that can't be changed.
Wow. Well, that's fantastic what you did, Rue. I heard about that, and it's so lovely to know that you're the person who made that happen in your area. I totally agree with you that data is really important and we have seen it firsthand when we published our bird booklet. And like I said, farmers went from like, we hate birds to, let's support them. And one of our board members who's been around for almost 20 years with us is Salmon Safe. They have requirements for setbacks. I don't know if you know about Salmon Safe. They're up in the Northwest, and but I don't know that I've looked at what their references are. They are associated with the Pacific Rivers Council, and they have scientists on their board. So it would be interesting to hook you up with them if you haven't already spoken with them.
I haven't spoken with them. I was just using the setback as an example, because there are many other instances where it was really hard to get language into governing documents just because there was no data to demonstrate how critically important it was. The same could be true of lots of the other issues that you're working on, but it was just an easy example for me to come up with. But I'd love to be in touch with those, because there will be another general plan update.
Yeah, well, when we worked on the food safety and conservation issue for 8 years, I ended up publishing a 100-page document that had hundreds of references related to food safety and conservation. And I had to put them all together. It was like, and because of that document, that's what, you know, FDA had to like, oh, wait a second, there is some research here. We can't ignore it. And so, you know, and that's the question, like, how do you, what's already out there that we can already use versus, you know, what needs to be done? And so there's a mix. Yeah. And then how do you funnel that to the policymakers? I think that's really, yeah, super important. I would imagine that that's why everybody's here, is because we want to change policy.
I'm so happy with this conversation, and I really want to hear what's on your mind, Tom.
Well, you know, I too am enjoying this conversation and wasn't sure how I can interject. I want to thank Eric for sort of kicking us into talking about the complexity of sequestration and how it connects to the wildlands policy and good farming practice in general. I've been doing some family genealogy research, and I found myself in the Hugh Bancroft History of California the other day. And there's a throwaway line referencing the food supply of I think it was the California missions or something. And the grasshoppers were really good. That was an indicator at that time of the health of the food system. And so I was just reflecting on how that bit of historical information reflects on this conversation that we're having, because as much as I agree with Rue, and Rue knows I'm a data geek, so does Claire, you know how dedicated to that I am. There are always going to be boundaries of the analysis and problems that come in when you don't draw the circle of the scope of the analysis appropriately. We could do a very good job of measuring sequestration in the soil microbiome, but neglect the above soil hedgerows, for example. Similarly, we could do a wonderful job and then have a forest fire burn through and change the time sequestration potential of the farm. So it's a daunting problem, and it's one that has a cultural dimension as well. So I'm glad to hear that the industry is grappling with how to provide incentives. It'll be easier if they draw a really small circle around what they're trying to incentivize and track and measure and compensate. But I think, at least the way I'm thinking about things these days, leaving some of our hubris for being perfect managers of the ecosystem to the side, if we defer to wild systems, indigenous knowledge, and leave some land that's not intensively managed, is really something we can try to squeeze into policy these days, even when we're busily trying to sequester as much carbon and harvest as much crops and preserve as much water as possible. So those are some comments that just occur to me. I'm curious how other people are. It's not really a question in there, but I think that's probably stimulating enough to hear what other people have to say about it.
Well, one of the farmers that we are just getting ready to publish a video with, who's here in Watsonville, Tom Rose at Live Earth Farm. We worked with him. He's got 60 acres or so. And the reason why I'm bringing him up is he decided to retire some of his farmland because it was too steep. It was dangerous for him to drive on. It was eroding all the time. And now it's turning into an oak woodland, and willow, massive willows are holding the soil in place. And another farmer I was working with recently had done the same, taken 7 acres out of their, it was around 60 acres too, out of production because she wanted to make room for the wild. And so she had riparian habitat, but even like in the middle of her farm, she is making room for wildlife, planting different kinds of shrubs, and created a pond that some kinds of ponds are problems, but this was a pond that was not going to take too much water out of the river. And anyway, so yes, I agree with you there. We don't have to farm every square inch. We don't have to, on the other hand, I think, there's this, or maybe you don't know, but there is this big controversy about, is it better to just have industrial agriculture and preservation of our parks? Or can we have wild farms? Can we have an integration? And so, I'm in the camp of integration with a lot of others, but there is that question. And of course, the industrial folks are like, well, we're so efficient. Yeah, but are they? They're efficient in killing everything, including the insects on the planet. So anyway, yeah, I'll stop.
I saw you had your hand up, Claire, but I want to find out what's on Nick's mind before we close in about 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, everyone, and Jo Ann. Wow, I'm a huge fan, and it's a real treat to get such a personal presentation. Two questions. One may be short, one as you wish to take it. But the first one is, are you familiar with the landscape conservation cooperatives that the Department of the Interior funded pre-Trump? That was a nationwide effort at creating multi-stakeholder groups for wildlife corridors.
No, tell me, can you say that name again?
They're referred to as LCCs, or the Landscape Conservation Cooperatives. So, and I feel like, and I'm quite saddened that they were unfunded by Trump, but I'm hell bent to get them reestablished. And I think direct marketing from farmers, I think, could be a funding stream. Anyway, kind of a related question is, I'm here in West Marin, where these poor Thule elk that once numbered in, up to 1 million head, which is about how many cattle we have in California today.
There's more than that, 5 million.
Oh, really? Okay. In any case, yeah, they're surrounded by dairies, Strauss, Clover, and you go to Africa, and there's a long, where some of the oldest human societies that are pastoralists, they live with cattle and wildlife very harmoniously. Yet there seems to be this, I would call like a moral monopoly on the local food benefit of Strauss and Clover and some of the other ranchers and dairies, at the expense of any significant rewilding and wildlife coexistence. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on especially with the wolf and black bear heading south rapidly. Some people even say the grizzly, and the wolverine, and you name it. It's like everything's coming back. And I know it's going to get hot and hotter. And more than anyone, you are positioned to maybe be a voice of reason between these very polarized camps. And I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, first, I'm going to look up the Landscape Conservation Cooperative, and wildlife corridors are where it's at. I feel like ultimately that every farm should be a conduit for safe passage of wildlife. But yeah, how do we maneuver, thread the needle on these really controversial issues? Well, we do always talk about predator friendly agriculture. For years and years, we had a predator friendly farmer, Becky Weed from Montana, who had mountain lions. She didn't have wolves, but sheep. And she always told me that if you have a healthy ecosystem around you, you're not going to have all these predators eating your livestock because they have enough to eat. And so, but she had guard animals, and I think that's really a good way to go for predator issues. And sometimes it's tough for ranchers to do that, but that is really, I think that's the main solution. There's definitely lots of nuances in the different animals and how to manage them to make sure the wildlife are safe and don't have to be, the farmers don't think they have to be killed. But yeah, that specifically the issue that you brought up in Marin County, it's a tough one because yeah, people are on one side or the other. And I can understand both sides really well. And our board, we've talked about it a lot. And it's tricky. I personally falling on the side of the wildlife, but it's political, and it's it's view sheds, and it's livelihoods, and we haven't figured that one out.
Yeah, it's a hard one. We've discussed it before in our committee just a bit. We're at the hour that I promised us to be over, and I just want to. We can stay later. We can get acquainted and continue talking, but I want to finish the meeting. Just inviting Wendy to. I see that you had one comment in the chat about what got us in this mess. And I just want to know if you're happy with connecting me and Tom around WildFarm Alliance and tonight's meeting. You're on mute.
Can't hear you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm really grateful that you made this happen. And as I had said, I always love small world connections, and we clearly have some. And yeah, and as I also said earlier, I think that networking and collaboration and these kind of perhaps seemingly cross-issue discussions where we discover that actually, again, when we're looking at our goals and what are we trying to do in the world, we have a lot in common, and a lot to learn from each other. So thank you for putting this together. And yeah, I'm happy. And obviously we have a whole lot more we always can talk about and keep learning.
There is so.
Thank you.
This just opens the door, doesn't it?
Mhm.
on the next year's agenda. How about that, Eric? I want everybody that I don't have your email for to put it in the chat. Let me see who. I guess I. But if any connecting you want to be doing in the chat right now. And I'm officially closing the meeting, and I really thank you, but I'm gonna we can stay and visit. So